The winter sun filtered through the stained glass windows of St. Augustine's Church, casting coloured patterns across the polished pews where my father's casket rested. I sat in the third row, not the first, where immediate family belonged, but not the back either, always somewhere in between, always uncertain of my place. Edouard Courcelles had been my father for 28 years, but I'd spent most of those years being told I wasn't really his daughter. Not by him, never by him, but by everyone else. His sister Dolores, his brothers Philippe and Jean-Marc, the cousins who whispered when they thought I couldn't hear. Even strangers at family gatherings who'd look at my dark hair and olive skin next to his pale features and blue eyes and draw their own conclusions. "Your mother trapped him," they'd say, just loud enough for me to overhear, "got pregnant to force the marriage. Everyone knows Edouard wanted to marry Isabelle, but your mother got there first with a pregnancy he couldn't ignore." My mother, Maria, had died when I was 18. Cancer, aggressive and merciless. She'd spent her final weeks trying to prepare me for a family that would never fully accept me. "They've always been suspicious," she'd whispered from her hospital bed. "They think you're not his. But Leah, you are. You're his daughter in every way that matters. Don't let them take that from you." I'd asked her if we should do a paternity test. Prove it once and for all. She'd squeezed my hand weakly. "Your father knows the truth. That's all that matters. Don't give them the satisfaction of making you prove your own existence." So I didn't. I endured the whispers, the exclusion, the constant subtle reminders that I was different, that I didn't quite fit, that my place in the Courcelles family was tolerated but never truly welcomed. Now my father was dead. Heart attack at 63, sudden and shocking, and I was sitting in this church wondering if I had any right to grieve as loudly as the others, wondering if my tears were legitimate or if even my mourning was an intrusion. The service was beautiful. The priest spoke of my father's generosity, his love of classical music, his dedication to his work as an architect. People stood to share memories, his golf buddies, his business partners, his childhood friends. My uncle Philippe spoke about growing up with Edouard, about brotherly adventures and family traditions. Nobody mentioned me. In the slideshow of photos, hundreds of images chronicling my father's life, I appeared in perhaps 10, always on the edges, always looking slightly uncertain, like I was photobombing someone else's family. When the service ended, people filed out to their cars for the procession to the cemetery. I was gathering my coat when my Aunt Dolores appeared beside me. She was my father's only sister, 61 years old, elegant in black, with the kind of sharp beauty that came from years of privilege and certainty. "You shouldn't be here, Leah." I turned to face her, exhausted. "Aunt Dolores, please, not today. Especially today. It's shameful, this pretending. Everyone can see it. You were never really Edouard's daughter. Everyone knows it, but you. Dad never questioned it, because he was too kind, too honorable. He married your mother out of obligation and raised you out of duty. But we all knew the truth. Look at you. You look nothing like him, nothing like any of us. You're your mother's child, certainly, but whose else? That's the question no one dared to ask while Edouard was alive." People were staring now. Other family members pretending not to listen while obviously hanging on every word. This was the scandal they'd whispered about for decades, finally being aired publicly. My mother loved Dad. She would never. Your mother was ambitious. She saw a wealthy man from a good family, and she trapped him, got pregnant, with someone's child, not necessarily Edouard's, and he was too decent to abandon her. He gave that child his name, gave her his home, gave her every privilege. But that doesn't make you his daughter. Not really. I felt tears threatening but refused to let them fall. "Why are you doing this? Why now?" "Because now that Edouard's gone, we don't have to pretend anymore." You're not getting anything from his estate, and after today, I don't want to see you at family gatherings. You've been tolerated long enough. It's time to accept that you were never really one of us." "That's enough, Dolores." The voice came from behind us. Mr. Gerard, my father's attorney, stood in the church doorway. He was in his late 60s, silver-haired, with the kind of quiet authority that came from decades of handling difficult situations with grace. "This is a private family matter," Dolores said coldly, "and I represent the family's legal interests, which means I need to speak with all of you before we proceed to the cemetery. There are some matters regarding Edouard's will that need to be addressed immediately. The will reading is tomorrow. There are preliminary matters that Edouard specifically requested be handled today. All immediate family members need to gather in the parish office. Now, please." Dolores looked annoyed but couldn't refuse. We filed into the small office off the main sanctuary. Dolores, Philippe, Jean-Marc, my cousins Mathieu and Sophie, and me. We sat around a worn wooden table while Mr. Girard closed the door and opened his briefcase. "Before I read Edouard's will tomorrow, he asked me to address something that he knew would arise immediately upon his death, specifically questions about Leah's parentage." Dolores leaned forward. "Finally, someone willing to address the obvious." "Indeed, the obvious." Mr. Girard pulled out a folder. Edouard was very aware of the family's doubts about Leah. He found them hurtful and unfounded, but he understood that without concrete proof, the whispers would never stop, so he took steps to provide that proof. He opened the folder and extracted 2 official-looking documents. These are paternity test results from 2 separate DNA analyses. The first was conducted 18 years ago when Leah was 10 years old. Edouard requested it, not because he doubted, but because he wanted documentation that would silence the family gossip once and for all. He handed me the first document. I stared at it, barely able to process what I was seeing. My name, my father's name, lab results, and in the conclusion section highlighted in yellow, probability of paternity, 99.999%. Edouard Courcelles cannot be excluded as the biological father of Leah Courcelles. That first test, Mr. Girard continued, was performed at Gene Lab International. Edouard provided a blood sample. Maria provided a cheek swab from Leah. The samples were processed independently, and the results were notarized. "Tests can be faked," Dolores said, but her voice lacked conviction, which is why Edouard requested a second test when Leah turned 21. "A different laboratory, different methodology, new samples. Here are those results." He handed me the second document. Same conclusion. Same 99.99% probability. Same undeniable truth. Edouard Courcelles was my biological father. "Both tests," Mr. Girard said, addressing the room, "were witnessed by independent medical professionals. Both have complete chain of custody documentation. Both are legally admissible as evidence, and both conclusively prove that Leah is Edouard's biological daughter." The room was silent. Philippe looked stunned. Jean-Marc stared at the documents like they'd betrayed him. Mathieu and Sophie exchanged uncomfortable glances, and Dolores sat frozen, her certainty crumbling. I don't understand," Dolores finally said. "She looks nothing like him, nothing like our family." "She looks like her mother," Mr. Girard said simply, "which is how genetics sometimes works. But genetically, unquestionably, she is Edouard's daughter. He knew it. Maria knew it. And now all of you know it with scientific certainty." He pulled another envelope from his briefcase. "Edouard also left a letter. He asked me to read it to all of you before we proceed with any other estate matters." He opened the envelope and began reading in my father's familiar handwriting. "To my family, if Mr. Girard is reading this, then I am gone, and Dolores has likely already begun questioning Leah's parentage publicly. I'm sorry, Leah, that I predicted correctly. But I knew my sister too well to hope otherwise. I want to be very clear about something. Leah is my daughter, not just legally, not just on paper, but biologically. The DNA tests prove it beyond any scientific doubt, but more importantly, she is my daughter because I chose her, loved her, raised her, and am proud of the woman she became. The family's doubts about Leah have been the greatest pain of my life. Not because I ever doubted. I was present at her conception, her birth, every moment of her life. I never questioned that she was mine. But because I allowed those doubts to poison her childhood. I should have done these tests 20 years ago and shoved the results in your faces. I should have demanded you accept her or be cut off. I should have protected her from your whispers and suspicions and cruel exclusion. Instead, I took the coward's path. I hoped you'd come around on your own. I hoped that time and familiarity would make you see Leah for who she is, a brilliant, kind, talented young woman who deserved your acceptance regardless of genetics. But you never did see her that way. You saw her as an outsider, as proof of a scandal that never happened, as the daughter of a woman you never accepted because she wasn't from your world, wasn't from the families you'd chosen for me. Dolores, you've been particularly cruel. You treated my daughter like an imposter in her own family. You excluded her from gatherings. You made sure she knew she wasn't truly welcome. You poisoned other family members against her with your conspiracy theories and your bitterness. I forgive you for what you did to me. That's between us as siblings. But I cannot forgive what you did to an innocent child who only ever wanted to be accepted by her family. That's why you're not in my will, not one penny, not one possession. You get my forgiveness, which you probably don't want and nothing else. Philippe and Jean-Marc, you were cowards. You knew Dolores was wrong, but you never stood up to her. You went along with the exclusion because it was easier than confronting our sister. You get small bequests, enough to be comfortable, but not enough to reward your moral cowardice. Mathieu and Sophie, you were children when this started, and you never had the power to change things. You're getting larger bequests because you were victims of the family's prejudice too, forced to participate in excluding your cousin. And Leah, my beloved daughter, you get everything else. The house where you grew up, the architecture firm I built, the investments I made, all of it. Not because I'm trying to prove something to the family, but because you're my daughter and you deserve your inheritance. More than the money, I'm leaving you these DNA tests. I should have given them to you years ago, should have handed them to you and said, "Here, this is proof, you belong, you are mine. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." I'm sorry I waited until I was gone to give you that certainty. I'm sorry I was too concerned with family harmony to give you the one thing you needed most, indisputable proof that you were never the outsider they made you feel like. You were always my daughter. These tests just prove what I always knew. I love you, Leah. I'm proud of you, and I'm sorry I didn't protect you better from the family's cruelty. Stand tall now. This is your family, whether they accept it or not. This is your place. These tests prove it. The inheritance proves it. And most importantly, my love proves it. To everyone else, Leah is a Courcelles. She always was. Accept it or don't, but you can't change the truth. With love and regret, Edouard. Mr. Girard folded the letter carefully. The room was absolutely silent. I was crying, tears streaming down my face, finally holding proof that I was never the lie they'd said I was. Dolores stood abruptly. I need to leave. You're excluded from tomorrow's will reading, Mr. Girard said quietly. Per Edouard's instructions, you're not a beneficiary and you're not invited. She left without another word, her certainty shattered, her narrative destroyed. Philippe approached me hesitantly. Leah, I'm sorry. We were wrong. I was wrong. I should have stood up for you. You should have, I agreed, but you didn't. Can you forgive us? Maybe, eventually, but not today. Today, I need to grieve my father without worrying about whether I have permission to mourn. At my dad's funeral, my aunt said I was never his child, that I was the product of my mother's deception, tolerated out of pity, finally free to be excluded now that Dad was gone. Then the lawyer revealed 2 DNA tests, one from 18 years ago, one from 7 years ago, both proving conclusively that I was Edouard Courcelle's biological daughter, and a letter explaining that Dad had known about the family's doubts, had gathered proof to silence them, and had left me his entire estate while cutting out the aunt who'd spent decades making me feel like an imposter. I inherited the house, the firm, the investments, everything my father had built. But more valuable than any of that was the proof, the scientific, undeniable, legally documented proof that I was never the lie they'd said I was. Dolores never apologized. She moved to Lyon, and we haven't spoken since. Philippe and Jean-Marc have tried to rebuild relationships with varying degrees of success. The cousins have been warmer, reaching out genuinely. But the real gift was knowing my father had fought for me. Even if he'd done it quietly, even if he'd waited too long, he'd still fought, he'd gathered proof, he'd written that letter. He'd made sure that after his death, no one could ever again say I wasn't his daughter. At my dad's funeral, my aunt said I was never his child. Then the lawyer revealed the DNA tests that proved I always was. And finally, after 28 years of doubt, I knew I belonged.